Good evening, Endo Summit Live, and welcome to this very exciting webinar. We are talking about endometriosis in society. We are joined by Representative Jillian Gilchrest. Jillian, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am a state representative in West Hartford, Connecticut. So I represent my community at the state capitol. I just got sworn into my third term in office, which means I'm in my fifth year.
Wonderful. And we are also joined by Dr. Amy Stein, a pelvic physical therapist. Amy, can you introduce yourself? Because just to say you're a pelvic physical therapist doesn't really define you very well.
Sure. I'm Dr. Amy Stein, a pelvic floor physical therapist in New York City. I've been practicing pelvic health since 2000, and I opened my one office in 2003, Beyond Basics Physical Therapy, and then a second office in 2018, both in the New York City area. I am the past president of the International Pelvic Pain Society, was president in 2017. And I've written a couple books, Heal Pelvic Pain and Beating Endo, How to Reclaim Your Life from Endometriosis. And both are patient-centered books, but practitioners read them as well. And they're both very helpful, a lot of self-care in both books.
Now, we got word from your co-author, which is Dr. Iris Orbuck, that we have copies of Beating Endo to give away at the Endometriosis Summit. So that should be really fun. Perhaps I'm sure we could hook you up with one, Representative Gilchrest. I think if you haven't checked it out yet, it's a great book. So let's talk about it. You know, it's not, unfortunately, it's unusual for a politician to be interested in endometriosis. How did you come to your passion for helping those with endometriosis?
Sure. So my background is in women's health and safety. So that's the main area I focus in with regards to public policy. And I had a colleague and friend. I'm also a social worker. So I'm a master's in social work. And a woman I met through school who does homelessness advocacy in the state of Connecticut suffers with endometriosis. And so she asked to have coffee and said she had this thing to tell me about that she thought I'd be interested in. And she shared her story with me, a story that unfortunately now I've come to find out is all too familiar, of a life of being told it was all in her head, that nothing was wrong with her, that pain is normal, to suck it up. And then come to find out when she tried to get pregnant, she couldn't get pregnant and they discovered endometriosis. So that kind of this light bulb went off, and I realized my former sister-in-law also had endometriosis. And she comes from means and had been to 3 or 4 nationally recognized fertility specialists. And it wasn't until that 4th or 5th one where they realized she had endometriosis. And so I just started doing some research, and quite frankly, it's from a very feminist perspective, because once again, I mean, I recognize and wholeheartedly understand in the work we do try to recognize that anyone can experience endometriosis, but it does disproportionately impact women. And once again, it is something that impacts women that we have under-researched, that we do not fund, we don't really work on. And so that really got me fired up to form a working group here in the state of Connecticut.
We love to hear that. So what's the working group up to?
So we are in year 2, and the working group brings together a variety of professionals, advocates, individuals with endometriosis, and we meet monthly. And during our monthly meetings, we have different topics and different experts who share information with us. And then we formulate policy recommendations, we put those to the legislature, and we try to pass legislation. And so last year we were successful at requiring physicians to be trained here in the state of Connecticut. And we developed a plan for an endometriosis biorepository. And so this year we're moving forward with fulfilling that plan. And so establishing an endometriosis biorepository at UConn Health, which would partner with Jackson Laboratory here in the state. They will collect samples, and there are researchers who are going to try and be working to get grant funding and to see if they can develop tools to identify endometriosis and also to treat endometriosis. And then we're trying to get the school nurse training into our schools and get our school nurses up and trained. We're also doing some fertility legislation so that individuals with endometriosis would be able to have coverage to be able to have their eggs preserved, for example.
Yes, I know all too well the cost of that, because certainly not covered in New Jersey, not covered for egg freezing. But it's interesting because covered, if I had cancer, it would be covered. But endometriosis is known to degrade the quality of eggs in that ovary, not covered. So, that's why I live in the middle of the renovation, because I can't afford to go anywhere else after paying for it. So, Amy, you've been working in physical therapy a very long time. Amy pretty much established the field, certainly on the East Coast of physical therapy. What do you see that's emerging in endometriosis care that you haven't seen maybe in the past or as your career has evolved?
Well, what I've seen is that it's definitely more recognized. I think, there are definitely some healthcare providers that are treating it, I guess, more, what's the right word? I don't want to use any inappropriate. They are really honing in on the disease and trying to figure out what is best for the patient. And I think that's been an issue in the past where it's been like, in the past, there hasn't been like a biopsychosocial approach. There's been more just like, here's the disease and, this is what you could do on your own. Physical therapy wasn't even really thought decades ago. It's become more and more realized that it's not just the surgery or the medication. It's the physical therapy, it's the mindfulness, it's diet and getting moving. Exercise is really important. And also knowing your boundaries and what works better for you, what doesn't work as well for you. So that's definitely expanded, that there's definitely more. And the Endo Summit is a perfect example. And the International Pelvic Pain Society are great examples of how we have broadened our view of how to treat endometriosis and other chronic diseases. I do have to say, from a more political side, that unfortunately, the insurance, I don't know, you may have wanted to bring this up later, Sally, so I apologize, but unfortunately, the insurances are still not recognizing that this is more of a chronic disease, and we have to really look at it from a physical therapy lens, as we have to take care of, one, the whole patient, but two, it's not a knee injury, it's not a shoulder injury, that sometimes those are, and can end up being chronic too, but typically 6 to 8 visits. And you can't look at it that way. You have to look at it a different lens with all of our patients.
It's interesting because I'm licensed in multiple states, but I'm required opioid training, so that we can recognize abuse, we can recognize certainly the need for opioids, but there's all this in-depth training that we have to have regarding that. But then when it comes to physical therapy, something that would be such a tool for those with chronic pain, so that maybe they don't need the pain meds or they're not as at risk at feeling so abandoned. The reimbursement for chronic pain cases, which take a lot more time, effort, energy on everybody's part, therapist and patient, are reimbursed at the same rate, say an ankle sprain is reimbursed, that's going to require that 6 to 8 sessions. So we were going to do it later, but I do think it's important. Certainly while Jillian is here, there are lots of aspects to endometriosis care. It's not just the surgery. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been looking at the insurance piece as well. And what's been frustrating so far is that with the coding as it is, we've been hitting this barrier that's a federal issue. So with the ablation surgery versus excision surgery. And so I am having conversations with our hospital association. They're helping me out, which is awesome, trying to figure out, okay, what are the codes? What are you talking about? Is there a way we could pass some type of legislation to get around the codes at this point so that if someone went out of network, but then as you all are probably fully aware, like they can't even get out of network because their insurance says, no, that is covered because they're seeing that someone does ablation, not excision, so we're working through these dynamics, trying to figure out, is there a way at the state level that we could help folks to be able to get insurance coverage? Haven't found a solution yet, but we're working on it because, yeah, there's so many levels to this. It's
Do
like,
you think a lot? Yeah. Do you think a lot of that goes to that endometriosis isn't its own specialty?
yes. From learning from so many people, yeah, that to me, and that again then is a federal piece. And so we are using the working group to push on our federal delegation with the hopes that we can engage them more and they can push at the federal level.
Yeah, I think the other danger, and Amy, we see this in PT all the time, is it becomes like the Wild West because there's no standard for what an expert is, right? So like anyone can hang a shingle outside and say that they specialize in, endometriosis, or anyone can write a website that uses SEO for excision 27 different ways, but be performing ablation surgeries. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a great, did you know, so I sit with different surgical companies trying to get sponsors all the time. Rarely do I get any, but they never understood what this world is like. Did you know getting into it that there would be a million facets and a million motivations to every single conversation you ever had about endometriosis?
No. Simple answer. Nope, not at all. It has been entirely eye-opening. But that said, I mean, having worked in, my background again is like anti-sexual violence, anti-domestic violence, and there's all these nuances in those worlds. So I'm not new to nuance, but no, in a million years, I didn't know all these different dynamics would be taking place.
Yeah, it makes it so, difficult. Honestly, it makes it difficult for the patient too, because they think that they're doing a good thing. And of course, our industry that is the ultimate manipulator of those with endometriosis, because maintaining the status quo helps certain industry, right? We've seen that. Everybody's nodding. Does anyone care to comment, or I'll be the brave one? Yeah. So there's always sometimes a motivation, and it's very sneaky. Like you could cruise around a million sites and not realize where the motivations are coming from. And I don't see that much in the thyroid community, or in the, I work a little bit in the epilepsy community. I don't see that in other communities that I see in our community.
Mm.
Yeah. So, when you talk about policy, well, actually, before I ask that, I had this reel that went up today on Instagram, and I said, what would you all like to see for change? So I could list them. So like the top 5 things, one of the top 5 was they want to see the standard of care for endometriosis in the US change. How do you feel the standard of care set by ACOG affects the actual person with endometriosis?
Well, and as I continue to learn, from what I know, that's a part of the problem of not being able to have these specialty codes. And so I see that as like the starting block, like that needs to be changed in order to then recognize all the different ways endometriosis manifests in someone's body. And then also to recognize, like you're saying, like to create these specialists or to recognize specialists so that people can get the treatment that they need and deserve. So that one's a big one.
What's interesting, Amy, you might remember a few years ago, when they revised the standard of care, which they revised them while many endometriosis advocates stood out front protesting, which I forget if that's in the film or not, but Endo what hosted that protest in many ways. But do you remember on the revised standards for pre and postnatal, they included physical therapy in the care, and everybody cheered for that, but they did not take the step to include it for anything on pelvic pain. Do you have an opinion on that?
Right. And then the whole idea that we can't talk about painful sex either. That's a different topic, but also a similar topic as this one. We, as physical therapists, we can't talk about painful sex because it's not covered by insurance, which is an issue in itself, because you not only enjoy parts of life, but also procreate. And that's a topic that we need to bring to you too, Jillian, because
right, we have to write in our codes wants to tolerate tampon or needs to tolerate speculum. We can't write dyspareunia. We can't use any. I mean, we can't. But Amy and I work in practices where we're not necessarily insurance dominated. But the other thing that I learned this year is that, and there's something called Center for Intimacy Justice. You can't write sex on Instagram or Facebook and put a woman's picture with it.
You can't.
But there are instances that are, whether or not they write out the word sex or but there are, you should see what you're allowed to put if it has a man's picture. And Center for Intimacy Justice does all this research, but for somebody who works in endometriosis, I'm having a whole hour and a half workshop on painful sex and intimacy, and I can't use the word sex to advertise it, right? It's crazy.
Because the insurance won't cover that for you all?
No, well, in terms of the Endometriosis Summit, because Instagram and Facebook will tank my algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to write like S, and you have to put a number 3, something like a number 3X. I think that's what you do.
Right.
So that the E is backwards.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of care, we have to write, like, if I were trying to treat somebody for painful sex, I have to write that they need to be able to tolerate a tampon.
A tampon or gynecological visit. And then even then, they sometimes deny that. And it's like, okay, but my patient can't. There's certain parameters with gynecological visits that have to be mandatory to protect the patient's health, and you're not covering that either. We could go on and on about this. I've also seen, by the way, how insurance coverage in general, I don't know, Jillian, if you know as much about the PT end of it decades ago. So when I started in 2000, we were actually getting like decent reimbursement from insurance. And now slowly, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. I look at my books from 2000 compared to today, and I'm like, wow, we used to be able to accept so much more insurance because they actually paid us something. And now it's like we hardly can accept it because we do 1 hour one-on-one, and just similar to Sally, we're very specialized in pelvic pain and endometriosis, and we just wouldn't get the coverage that we need for these patients. And then our patients require an hour a visit at the minimum. So it's definitely a challenge.
So it's interesting. I work with a company. I don't want to announce the name of the company, but I work with a company, and they were trying to prove that pelvic pain should be reimbursed. And they went to the state board for insurance. They did not start in New York or New Jersey. They did start with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they showed them data. Here's the patients that we're treating with pelvic pain. They showed them numbers. They had a whole office devoted to this. And the initial answer on the initial review was, our patients don't have pelvic pain. Like, you have the one-offs. And I just think, like, we don't have the one-offs. And people aren't talking about pelvic pain. And I would say endometriosis is 1 in 10. Pelvic pain is probably 1 in 3.
Yes, 1 in 3. And men have pelvic
right.
pain.
So I was blown away. So meanwhile, because they had such data, they were able to, that'll be in a podcast by the Endo Summit, how they did it and what company it is and whatever, because that's their thunder. I don't want to share it, but it took almost having an entire practice devoted to data to win the argument, to have it covered. Which
well, you said it's like this then cyclical thing, because then this to me ties into, I mean, what you're saying of like our culture not being able to talk about sex or recognize that women might enjoy sex or, want to even have that dialogue. We also worked on a menstrual equity bill to get menstrual products, feminine hygiene products, K through college. And while there were a host of reasons that we could talk about of why that's important, in particular economic insecurity, and it was also like, let's talk about your period, like, because a part of the problem here, right, is that like it's so hush hush still, which is wild, that people still don't talk. And in doing this work, it's been really interesting because women legislators in their 50s and 60s have been the ones who come to me the most and thank me for what I'm doing, and share that, because you don't talk about this. Like, they've just been so grateful. And I'll be on, like, to me, it wasn't weird. Like, what? Why wouldn't we talk about it? And so, yeah, there's just like, so that's mind blowing, the sex piece, not mind blowing, but mind blowing.
At the Endo Summit, Jillian will be our keynote. It's very exciting. But
very excited. Thank you.
Right before you, Chris Bobel, who is a sociology researcher, I say in patriarchy and menstruation, but she probably doesn't want to be described that way. But she's going to talk about the underpinnings of society and how ingrained not talking about menstruation is with our social construct. And I think it'll be interesting because she'll talk first, and then and then after that, it's over. No, not after that. We have the rest of the boring conference, but essentially, I think that
not going to be boring.
I think you're a different day than that. So, right. So, but I think that, if you want to talk about why progress is stalled, you have to talk about that. Probably until 5 years ago, we weren't allowed to talk about the period. Even on Zoom, we'd probably get blocked.
Yep.
Yeah. It's incredible. We're probably older than you, but I remember you used to have to hide the tampon in your sleeve, if you wanted to go. Now the girls don't do that in the schools. Yeah. So another one of what change would you like to see, which is something you could talk about, Jillian. Everybody wanted teens to be educated not to normalize their cramps. Do you want to talk a little bit about your nurse's education? And I thought we were having Shannon Cohn. She asked me for the link, but she's not here.
Well, from Shannon Cohn and Endo What, and their great nurse training, we're trying to start with the school nurses, in the hopes that they'll be able to spread the knowledge. We also are putting into the bill that those school nurses would then do in services with other professionals in the school. Ideally, but this is a bigger battle too, culturally, it would be, in an ideal world, we'd have K through 12 comprehensive sexual health education, which would include conversations about all of this. But we still struggle, even in a very progressive state like Connecticut, to get comprehensive sexual health education every single year. So we're trying different ways, and there are all of these really powerful student groups who are working to get the feminine hygiene products into the school. And so it's my hope through those groups, we can help kind of foster those conversations that period pain is not normal, and you shouldn't be made to feel like you should just suck it up and ignore what's going on with your body. So.
Right. I think we started, like I always say, our mothers weren't allowed to talk about it, but now it's changed a lot. So if you were raised where everything was hush hush and you had to accept that what was going on with you, it sort of trickled down as we've begun to evolve, hopefully, to talk about it a little more. When we had the teen endo webinar, we talked about the stomach aches are typically the number one symptom. Amy, how much do you see that in your teen population?
Definitely stomach aches. And I try to explore, like, is it also the constipation? So then there's like the differential diagnosis that the practitioners need to do, because yes, it could be endo, but their number one symptom may actually be more constipation and issues with constipation, with possibly endo contributing to it or not, because we know the statistics with endo and the stages, and how stage 4, the patient may not have any pain or much pain. So you definitely have to do a lot of investigating as practitioners. And that's one change that, when you asked earlier, Sally, some of the changes that has been that I've seen more of. It still needs some work, but I definitely am seeing more, like, we're trying to differentially diagnose what the cause of their pain is. So
Yeah.
yes, long story long, yes, abdominal pain definitely is one of the things with our teen population.
How many, you talk to people with endometriosis probably all day, every day, both of you. Certainly I do. It's sort of a weird question. On average, how many times a day do you hear the story of being told it was in their head, or being told they were dramatic, or that somebody had depression? Everybody's nodding. Jillian, do you hear that story very often?
Yes. When I first launched the working group, hundreds of women reached out. And I'd say all of them had that story. Of being told it was in their head, and of being told they should, like, sent home by their doctor, or their parent would be called in and the parent would be told, like, they're making it up. Like, your daughter's being dramatic. Like, she needs mental health. Just constantly told, that it was, all in your head, making it. I mean, and to have that be told to you year after year after year, and then finally be recognized. I mean, I can't even, all the different dynamics that are going on. It's just so painful, and it angers me. That's where I'm like, come from a place of being angry that something could impact this many women. And we're at this point, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I think it's mind blowing. I spoke to someone today who was so moved by YouTube, they called me, which doesn't usually happen, who hadn't heard the word endometriosis until it showed up on a report from an emergency surgery in an ER. And this was not a young woman who had pain 5 minutes. This was somebody who had pain 20 years. And what made me so sad is that I probably have heard that story 6 times in the past 4 days. And it needs to stop. It needs to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it has slowed down a bit. Like, I feel like in the beginning, I was trying to think back. In the beginning of my career, I heard it a lot more. Like, have a glass of wine. Well, I drink wine. Well, do yoga. Well, I'm a yoga teacher. Like, okay, now what? But I do wonder, Sally, if I do still hear it. I do get now, like, the more chronic cases, like the more challenging. And I do wonder, because of that, if I am hearing less too, because they've been to the 8 doctors and they've been to so I'm not sure. Are you hearing?
I mean, I'm a patient also, everybody knows. So I will say, one of the first times I ever felt seen was reading Heal Pelvic Pain. And it was something I ordered off of Amazon, like in the middle of the night, and people didn't order off of Amazon in those days, right? So, I think that you, Amy, you approach, and now you have Beating Endo, which is much more focused on endometriosis. And I think, like, people I still don't feel seen by their physicians. I'm having this issue with the thyroid medication, and the answer from the nurse, and it's just 3 days without the medicine. No, No, it's 3 days without medicine that stops my heart from racing. What are you kidding me? It's only, and I think people with endometriosis, it's only cramps. It's only, oh, here comes, and we have all worked in that doctor's office. Here comes the one that complains all the time, or here comes, what's worse is when people, we always had a sliding scale if we could afford it, and like afford to do it. It is horrible what goes on. And Eileen Holowaka will present data on gaslighting, and it's mind-blowing, the data.
Yeah.
It's like if 200 million have endometriosis, you're probably looking at, 80% of those having had an incident of gaslighting. Yeah.
Mm.
It's really tough. It's really, really tough. So another thing, this is also a good one for you, that on our Instagram that people wanted to drive endometriosis forward was they wanted better diagnostics.
Mm.
Big push button topic right now.
Mm.
What do you think about the way endometriosis is diagnosed, and the way people think endometriosis is diagnosed, Jillian?
Well, once again, you're going to see this pattern. I think it's crazy. So it's my understanding that really the only way to get the complete diagnosis is with an invasive surgery, which is wild. Or there is now the acceptable, like, yeah, we think it must be. And so that's what that the endometriosis biorepository, it's a big name, but what we're hoping to do in Connecticut, because we do have some researchers, is that they will be taking tissue. They'll be able to take tissue from a variety of patients in the state and start to work on diagnostics, because to me, that's wild that, again, something that would impact this many people, there's no blood test. There's no
Right.
peeing on a stick test. It's just wild to me.
There's no blood test, and there's no peeing on a stick test, I believe, for two reasons. One is, oh, well, it's just people with periods that have a disease. Why should we help them? We could just stop their periods, which we know, in addition to being minimizing, is a complete myth. And I think that the second is what I believe the ultimate issue with endometriosis is: we're working with an outdated and inadequate definition of the disease. So for as long as that dominates, then people just can prescribe without true diagnosis. It's really an issue. I'm excited to see what the lab has in store.
Me too.
Is there
go ahead.
Like nomenclature?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to be able. So I see that from time to time. Should we really even be calling it endometriosis? And I mean, like, I'll answer the way I answer is like the way I text my little like ride or die in the community. I take a screenshot and then I send it to them, and I go, like, I can't change the name of the disease. I can't, like, I am working so much to change so many things. This is the name we're dealt right now. So should it be changed? Yeah, but it's not going to, I mean, it's very hard. And then, Amy, remember when they changed complex regional pain syndrome from reflex? Remember that? I used to sit in appointments, and people, like, even the doctors, I don't know what they call it anymore. So, like, I don't even remember which name is, correct. And so I think this is the name we're dealt with.
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking changing the name. So the vulvodynia, which is pain in the vulvar area, is basically the definition of vulvodynia. We sat with like different societies, and we came up with like a nomenclature and like what could be causing vulvodynia and what the course of action should be, and like graded it and everything. Anyway, that's a different.
But I thought we're actually supposed to say vulvar pain now. We're not supposed to say vulvodynia.
Yeah. But they did come up with like a whole nomenclature. And if you have like inflammatory, this
Right.
is the treatment, the proposed treatment. So anyway, it could be a thing that we could try to do. I can't take that on.
Amy's taking it on. That's it. Text it. Amy's taking it on.
I think it took like 5 years just to do that.
No, that's it. You're gonna change the name of endometriosis. I think like some of it comes down to, and this is a little out there, this is why Endo Summit can do what they do, is that there's not agreement on the definition of endometriosis. And so a lot of people fall back on, well, look at the research. And then you have to look at who is generating the research and what company is paying for that research. And to keep the definition the way it stands, that it's backflow of menstrual blood through the tubes, which is not correct, but to keep that does benefit an industry that wants to just stop the period because they make money off of that. And it toys with people, obviously, but I think it would be really, really hard. We have to be able to produce a different against that. We have to be able to work against that. And I haven't really figured that out. I thought at one point we could work against the code thing by having a standardized database of endometriosis surgeons, but that never came to fruition. But to work against,
you're making me think like we sometimes define things in state law, and I mean that seems like low-hanging fruit. I wonder how that would go if we like put the accurate definition of endometriosis into state law. Like I don't know how that would play out, but it would be a start. I don't know, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, it would be a start. I have you'll meet her at the summit because she's doing something in her other role, but I do have one of my favorite lawyers lurking on in the I see that her there who talks about doing, the Endo Summit is looking for an initiative beyond just our conferences because I need to take on more. But I think that would be an interesting approach. Would it be adopted by other states? Because we hope I hope the nurses program spreads to other states. I hope and it shouldn't just be about endometriosis care. We need menopause, we go through menopause very early. We need menopause education. We may need accommodations in the workplace to fully succeed. It goes well beyond, the surface that we have only scratched. But yes, you could define it. It would have been nice to have Shannon here. You've met Shannon? Yeah.
Yes.
Because Shannon's background's in law.
Okay.
Yeah. Shannon started as a lawyer who became a filmmaker who now has a movement.
Yes, she does.
A movement for social change.
She's coming to Connecticut. We're going to show the film, which I'm excited about.
Yes, so you're going to be over filmed because we're going to show the film at the Endo Summit too.
And I've seen it already too, so I'll just keep watching.
Right. And we saw it with Amy. We've seen it, but it's that's one of our first talking pieces that's really, really well done.
Yes.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to define endometriosis that way. I also one of the other comments that we got multiple times was everybody just tells me it's anxiety. That's we need to stop it, making anytime somebody with endometriosis complains, it's just their anxiety, because this is a real inflammatory disease. This wasn't like one comment. This was like 5 or 6 comments today.
Wow.
So what came first? The it's in your head, and then anxiety, or from it then thinking it's in their head? I mean, it's crazy.
What's better is, did people
cycle.
have anxiety at all, or did complaining and not complaining, but did asking for help cause somebody to tell them you just have anxiety, and then they internalize that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, to me, it sounds just like it's in your head. It's just the new way of saying that. Like, oh, you just have anxiety. What?
Or now we get mental health care matters, which mental health care does matter, but endometriosis care matters too.
You're still experiencing pain. So
yeah. It's unbelievable. We have a big push for other specialties to understand endometriosis. This year we're doing Bladder Hour, bladder hour just got cut just a little bit shorter today. It was bladder 2 hours, but now it's bladder hour. So because of sponsorship, but I went to AUA. AUA is the National Urological Association. So in gynecology you have ACOG yeah. So I go to AUA and they asked for patient advocates. So I apply for this thing and I go there, and a conference on urology, I would say out of 10 patients with endometriosis, at least 6 of them walk in with bladder related issues, whether it's pelvic floor, whether it's endometriosis, right? 6 out of 10. That's my own statistic. And not one lecture. And aside from me, there was not the word endometriosis mentioned in the entire conference. And then there was one other, it was a closed room, so I couldn't get in without paying for it, where I heard endometriosis was discussed, but that the real driver of pain was pudendal neuralgia, but that these people think that they have endometriosis. That was the only other time it was mentioned all conference.
Wow.
Right. And so I was so blown away by that we created didactics on the bladder this year. And we partnered with them to try to get more urologists in. I don't know, because I don't run the registration anymore, so I don't know if it was effective, the partnership. But to me, so like, how many people go to the urologist first? How many people go to the internist first? How many people go to the gastroenterologist first,
Yeah.
And what are we doing to train those?
Yep.
I wonder do you know how it's approached with like GI? Because GI is obviously like the gastroenterologists. Do they also have like less than an hour training in endometriosis, or?
I would say yes. We had the Murray Orbuck of the Orbucks. So at last year's conference,
and he's
GI, but yeah. I think I don't know how many Jillian must hear this story all the time. In your college student health, how many go with bloating to the student health center? Do you think the word endometriosis is mentioned to them?
I would think not. And it's interesting you bring that up, because now, having learned about endometriosis and what goes on, my freshman year college roommate, I would bet the world she had endometriosis. She would get her period and just lay on the bed in the most awful pain. And now to think back, I'm like, and no, not once but she'd just be laying there for days and bloated and I'm like, oh my God. Like, and I don't know her anymore, but I'm like, if I could find her and be like, did you have endometriosis? But to your point about the different specialties, we've had this conversation at the working group level. And unfortunately, we get back to, but until the OBGYNs, the pediatricians, the primary cares know, like, because we don't have the capacity of the world yet, right? Like, we can't even focus on the specialties because we're still just trying to get someone's everyday doctor to maybe know what endometriosis is.
See, I looked at it differently because sometimes people's my first symptom that made me go to a doctor, because you have symptoms for years you don't go to a doctor about, was flank pain and bladder from the hydronephrosis, right? That I was getting from the endometriosis on the ureter. And I did go to a urologist, and it might have been my second stop. I won't say it was my first. They find blood in the urine. They go, there's nothing wrong with you. That's normal. You must have taken the urine test when you were on your period. And I was like, I'm sorry, I was not. And then they think you're lying, that you don't, it was about to start or it just ended. Like, you don't know your own cycle somehow. And I think most people's first stop is the urologist. And that's why we focused on urology education. And I think a lot of people's first stop is the gastroenterologist, is the GI.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I also think the school nurse, I can remember the school nurse had like a hot pack area. Like, why do we have the hot pack area? Why not? Yeah, I just don't know how to mandate, you can't mandate better education on an inadequate definition also.
Mm.
Because then you're just passing around,
Yep.
right? See how that works?
Yeah. It all again. Yeah. It's like all these moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
we got a lot to do still.
We've got a lot to do. It's not good that we have a lot to do. The Endo Summit is turning 5. It should all be fixed by now. That's it. There's no room, no need for number 6. I think, this is an interesting one for your work that you do. Social media, friend or foe or both?
Both. Because I have trolls and haters, that's why it's a foe. But but a friend in that, oh my God, you can share such valuable information and connect with people and let people know what's going on and how they can get involved. So I will continue to use it and just ignore trolls.
Yeah, I think in endometriosis, it goes beyond trolls. So the best troll this weekend, the best one this weekend, Amy, was that pelvic physical therapy is the newest yoga or kale, that it's just a brush off to the patient.
Oh, great. Where'd you hear that?
I'll send you the screenshots.
Great.
It's and this was a big profile announcing this, that people, if you have pain after, this is my favorite, and we're having a whole webinar on this next week. If you have pain after surgery, you should go have more surgery, because physical therapy is just the kale or the yoga that people are offering you.
Wow.
I love the look on your face when I say it.
That's not good.
No. And I think, I always say that what I was most shocked about the Endo Summit was the anger. That the first year we turned on those mics, I had, and people weren't misplaced with, well, they were misplaced in that they shouldn't be angry with us. We're trying to make the change, but they have a right to that anger.
Right.
Because they have nowhere else to get it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your social media friend or foe.
Oh yeah,
So,
social media friend or foe.
yeah, so I definitely friend, but what we have to tell our patients is you have to be really careful what you listen to and who you follow or what you read, because there is so much misinformation, just like you identified just now, Sally. So that definitely is something we have to keep alerting our patients to, is that, you could be reading the wrong sites and the negative. See, I'm still on Facebook forums, right? I'm old school. So I'm like telling my patients, don't read those Facebook forums that are talking about how you'll never get better.
Amy, you could stop telling them not to read those forums. They're not reading those forums. They are hanging out on TikTok.
Oh, okay.
3-minute videos of wall Pilates so that they don't have to go to pelvic PT anymore. Right. That happens a lot too. I think, it's definitely
Meta. I said, does Facebook still exist?
It does exist. It's, people do. If I think the word is boomer, that it does. But it does exist, although we're not boomers. I love when my friends' kids yell at them, "Listen, boomer!" I think it's so hilarious. It makes
my kids call me that, and I'm like, guys, you have no idea what you're talking about.
It's hilarious. But I think that the other thing in endometriosis is profiles and advocates are easily bought, and they're not required to disclose.
Mm.
And so what is the, I think so as social media progresses beyond drunken elephant drops and dances, that there is going to be some sort of policies developed on what you have to disclose and what you don't disclose. And that can be very disruptive in endometriosis. Because if somebody's like, I watched a great pelvic pain profile, and then I looked at the caption and everything was sending you to websites where they're going to get kickbacks. So are those really good products, or are they need that money? And everybody needs money. I'm not saying money bad, but what are the required disclosures? I think those are going to change a lot.
Right.
Yes. All right. So our hour's almost up. And Endometriosis Summit is turning 5 this year. We will have the pull apart cupcakes to even prove it. And we are headed in person to Celebration, Florida, but we are available virtually worldwide. Amy, what are you looking forward to about the Endo Summit?
Hearing the latest and greatest from you and everyone else. Just hearing the updates and and also seeing all the wonderful faces. But it's helpful to hear like the continuous research that's being done, the differential how to better differentially diagnose through diagnostics or not. And and the updates on policies, and of course below the belt, which I've seen, but
Below the belt, under the stars.
Under the stars.
Yes.
I
And
would be Mickey.
yes. Below the Belt is being presented that particular night by Pelvic Rehabilitative Medicine. And that crew has made it possible for us to show that outside at the summit. So it could be like a social gathering, not just the film. Nice. So that's great. And Jillian, what are you looking? Is the Endo Summit the first big endometriosis thing you're going to?
Yes, I did get to go to Endo Black to their ball.
Oh, yeah.
Which was fantastic. But yes, this is my first summit, my first big endometriosis event. And I'm just looking forward to continuing to learn, make connections, and just gather information and new relationships. So thank you. I'm just so thrilled to be going.
Right. So Amy Stein will be on March 26th, and Jillian will also be on March 26th. For those that join us live, we have lots of really cool things going on. But I think the decision was made today to try to do the 4 Parks Challenge after the Endo Summit is over. So there's a group of people wanting to do that. If that's something that interests you, you could come to the summit too. But other than that, at this point, I'm looking forward to it being over, but I still look forward to finally being in person, because although we were in person last year, it's much bigger this year. Not as big as we used to be, but it's nice to be able to finally see everybody again.
Yeah, it is nice.
So, all right, next week, we are headed back here on Monday at 8 p.m. with Dr. Larry Orbuck, and we're going to talk about multidisciplinary approaches to endometriosis care. Dr. Vidali will return from his lecture circuit at that time. And I'm sorry you didn't get to meet him. You haven't met him yet, have you?
No. Will he be at the summit?
Oh, of course he'll be at the summit. But he's a very, he's a scientist also. He has a background in a science background as well as an MD. So the reproductive immunologist is always very interesting to talk to.
I look forward to that then when I'm in celebration.
Right. So we will be back here next week. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much for taking your time, both of you.
Thank you.
Both of you for what all you do. So
Thank you.
Take care.